Welcome to Get Moving TV. I'm Dr. Chris Landon. I serve as your host. I'm here today with Dr. Gerard Gibbons, who was here, a little while ago, but more like 5 years ago when we originally just talked about emotive storytelling. And towards the end of it, we got a little bit into legacy and what our families are leaving behind. And he had 30 boxes. And there's this little thing called COVID that occurred, and we all, as life and death became closer to us, we really start thinking about our past and where we've been and where we're going. So I had the great opportunity of going with him to Shelby, Montana, to look at the legacy there. But we're going to talk about that. So Gerard, welcome back to the show.
It's a real pleasure, Doc. It's a privilege to be here, and it was wonderful we had a chance to share this unique American experience in Montana just 2 months ago.
Well, that was every year I try and do something. You know, it's July 4th, so I went took my motorcycle up Highway 1 and flipped pancakes with the Lions Club and the like. And this year I go, God, I need something American. I want to see. So I took the Inland Empire train out of Seattle all the way to this little oil spot in the road called Shelby, Montana, thanks to you. What was so special about Shelby, Montana and your family?
Well, it actually is one of the most storied stories in American history. It's basically it's the commemoration, the celebration, the centennial of a heavyweight championship fight in the middle of nowhere, Shelby, Montana, July 4th, 1923. And it featured the legendary Manasseh Mauler himself, Jack Dempsey, against the world's top contender, my grandfather, Tommy Gibbons, for the World Heavyweight Championship in a small little American town. And that's what July 4th was honoring, this amazing sports story, legendary in its name.
Well, I know we've got the book here, which is just a small piece of what was in those 30 boxes. But I'd introduce you to Joel Gottler, my friend who's an agent, and he goes, "Hi, the first, as you went through, everybody was a hero. Every Gibbons was a hero, and then you started to find some villains. You started to find some, and I think when we talk about Shelby, Montana, and the villains there, it really comes out as a story in the book. It's not just about pictures. So tell us a little bit about the villainy that went on with Shelby, Montana, and Jack Dempsey.
Well, before the villainy, it's a great American story, underdog story of a small town in the middle of nowhere deciding to make a name for itself, which is really what America's all about, especially by tradition, is to come up from nothing and try to make a mark on the world. And this little town of 500 souls in the early 20s who had just discovered oil and trying to make a name for itself had the audacity to go after hosting a World Heavyweight Championship bout. And never mind the fact they had no money. It wasn't really about actually pulling it off. It was about getting national newspaper attention to this small little town right near the Canadian border, 30 miles south, right next to Glacier Park and Blackfeet Nation. This young soul named Buddy Johnson, who was the mayor's son, basically proposed to Jack Dempsey's nefarious manager, Doc Kearns. He would offer him $200,000 if he would come to Shelby and fight my grandfather, Tommy Gibbons. And they didn't really expect him to say yes.
Well, I think they ended up saying, well, 200,000, we meant 50,000 cattle. And Doc goes, well, what am I going to do with 50,000 cattle in New York City? I mean, for heaven's sakes, you know, that's...
It was a crazy plan, basically. It was so out of scale to have a little, you know... By the way, July 4th is significant in boxing history because back in the day, all the heavyweight championships or the major championships were held on July 4th. So the day is significant, the year is significant because Dempsey hadn't had a fight in 2 years. So why not gain a little national attention by proposing to host this fight? And never mind the fact that, again, the state had no money. There was no money to be had, but they just put this thing out there to get attention. What they never expected, again, was Doc Kearns to say yes, and now they're on the hook.
Well, and did Doc Kearns have anything against the state of Montana? Anything happen in his family? I don't want to ruin the plot of the book, but...
Well, it's one of the dark secrets that was never learned as to why Doc Kearns basically became notorious for basically raping the state of Montana. It's because something happened to his father 50 years beforehand, where he was taking for a lot of money. Nobody ever knew this story, so he was hell-bent to make amends, to make Shelby, Montana pay. And the story becomes this spectacle of what he does to the nation. Back in the day, Shelby 1923, this time of the story, this was the biggest sporting event in the world, bar none. And for this small town to try to stand up against Doc Hearns and his fighter, the notorious Jack Dempsey of legend, makes for an amazing tale.
Well, I know with the Yellowstone, I saw a little banner in there. So it's very much a part of that part of America, and the pictures, the Blackfeet chief who ended up basically adopting Tommy Gibbons, your great-grandfather. I mean, these are incredible stories hidden in here. Is this book coming out in some way or fashion?
Well, the first book has just been launched, and it's called Shelby 1923, The Dempsey-Gibbons Fight for Glory, and a Little Montana Town's Impossible Dream. And it's really an amazing display, kaleidoscopic and panoramic in its scope, of all these great people, nobodies from nowhere, trying to take on the moneyed East and the storied and the Hollywood West to host this great fight. So they were truly, it's an American underdog story. And keep in mind, boxing back in the day, the golden age, 1890, 1930, is the largest, most popular world entertainment by far. Baseball, horse racing are far behind. Boxing, it's all about boxing. And so, therefore, it was the thing to do if you're going to make any attention and garner world attention. Whether you're American, Europe, South America, Australia, New Zealand, it was boxing that basically attracted everyone. Because whether you were rich, like William Randolph Hearst, or a nobody or an immigrant on the streets of America with no money to your pocket, everyone could participate in some way in the sport. So that's why boxing was the order of the day. So yes, the book is just released. We just did the launch in Shelby, Montana. You were there. What was it like?
That town knows every detail about that fight. I mean, there's 3,500 of them now instead of 500, I think. And the museum was incredible. Every grandma, when she passed, all the toys and everything went into this incredible capture of Americana. But the way they lined up, and everybody had a story that was passed down that family from that day, that how their family had interacted, and then they got to meet you and get their book signed and all that. So it was, they were all very happy and very much a part of the fiber of what they are.
It's a very significant story of Montana. It obviously celebrates this beautiful town of Shelby, Montana, and its people. It honors the traditions of America. Remember, boxing is significant, not only to the state, not only to the world, but it's the most diverse of all sports. It was integrated many years, 65 years before Jackie Robinson, boxing was integrated. So it has a long tradition of people of all reflections, all flavors, participating because they could. And then one of the few things in the day where people could make any money at all if they were any good, if they were in a boxing ring. Some of those traditions still continue today, but boxing reflects America. I would actually call it America's game more so than even baseball, because it reflected so many aspects of American history. Now, the added dimension of being in Shelby, it also happens to be near the Canadian border, as I said, and within, rock-throwing distance of Blackfeet Nation, the great Blackfeet tribe. And they play a significant story, a part and role in this story, which deeply intertwines not only with the background of the story, but my family specifically. You just can't make it up as good as this.
Well, and the way you describe the fight in the book. So, I mean, here's Tommy Gibbons, who had helped build the same railroad that I took from Seattle all the way out to Shelby, Montana, on his way to Chicago, part of their family. And he wasn't expected to last a round or 2 rounds because he's against a man-killer. This Jack Dempsey, bare-knuckle fighter, can just destroy anybody. And yet here he is, round after round after round with his scientific boxing.
He was the man that stayed, became his name. They didn't expect it. Though he was the top world contender for 4 years, he was chasing Dempsey, one of the greatest fighters in the ring. The Gibbons brothers, of course there was two of them, but Tommy finally got his shot to go after Dempsey, even though he'd been hunting him down for 4 years. So yeah, he wasn't expected to last, but he did. Matter of fact, not only did, he did all the way to the finish, unlike any fighter in history. And Dempsey, to his credit, and I've fallen in love with Dempsey, the great, didn't know him well, but now after intensive study as an author and historian, I've come to really love these great fighters of the past. Dempsey is no exception to that. He admired Tommy, said he was the hardest fighter he ever fought, greatest fighter he ever fought. And yes, Tommy lasted all the way to the finish, and Dempsey could not put him down. And basically, my grandfather became famous for pushing up, for standing up to Dempsey and basically neutralizing him. Great story.
Well, and there's Doc. I mean, the referee is, oh yeah, it's Dempsey's referee, hired by Dempsey. I wonder if he's going to win this fight.
Yeah.
And yet the crowd cheered for your grandfather.
The Indians were behind my grandfather, the town of Shelby. Even Dempsey's father was behind my grandfather. I think every story needs an imposing anti-hero. That's Jack Dempsey. But even more so, every story needs a great arch villain, and that's his manager, Doc Kearns, who tries everything in the book, everything he can do, between the rules, the size of the ring. He makes it smaller so my grandfather can't get away from Dempsey. He makes it in the contract that you rabbit punches, which are illegal today, and they've been for almost a century, where you hit the back of the brain with the gloves. And he says, nope, my fighter needs to have rabbit punches. And not to mention finagling the town out of nearly $300,000. Basically, so much, he stalls so much before he gets any money to permit the fight to go forward that he stops most of the trains from Chicago and New York and LA and San Francisco from deciding to go to the fight. Otherwise, it would have been the second $1 million gate. So it's a fiasco. You can't create it better than that.
Well, they had what? They built for 42,000 people, and 12,000, 16,000, whatever showed up, including Tom Mix, the screen cowboy hero. And so it's like Taylor, whatever her name is, concerts, where everybody's following you around. This is the real deal. You want to be seen here. You want the photography seeing you. What happened to the Gibbons brothers after that, though? The scientific boxing, did that become a part of?
So great, thank you for bringing that up. So scientific boxing is, they call it the sweet science, is the art of, it's kind of like tango is to dance. It's about movement and motion and not getting hit. So it's an art to learn how to draw basically you're helping the other fighter to defeat himself or herself, because you just allow them to miss, just barely, just graze. And sweet science boxing takes a lot of skill. Jack Johnson, the great first black heavyweight, friends of the Gibbons brothers, is a sweet science fighter. Muhammad Ali was not. He was a power puncher. So was Mike Tyson. Tyson Fury, Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, those guys are sweet science fighters. Katie Taylor in Ireland, she's a sweet science fighter. Very elegant way of fighting style, not the power punchers. And the art of that, and the Gibbons are known for being sweet science masters. And matter of fact, their fighting style basically influences the next 100 years of fighting style. You can see it now in the ring today, perfected by the two brothers, Tommy and his older brother, Mike Gibbons, middleweight, the great middleweight, the St. Paul Phantom, they called him. So the Gibbons brothers make sweet science fighting absolutely the highest fighting art form.
Well, I know from my dad was in World War II, and boxing was part of their training. Did that come from the Gibbons?
It did. It's so interesting. Most people don't know that in World War I, America entered the war without a standing army. Not since really the Civil War. Everything had been stood down. There was a little skirmish down in Mexico at the beginning of the 1900s. But by and large, there was no standing army. World War I comes along. Europe's been fighting for 3 years before the U.S. gets in. When we jump in, we've got a problem. We've got to raise an army, and we have 3 to 4 million men signing up and enlisting to fight. But guess what? They're not in shape. They've never fought anybody. They've got no forts. There's no camps. They got no regiment or discipline. And the Gibbons brothers are the most famous boxers of the time. And my great uncle, Mike, the St. Paul Phantom, Mike Gibbons, approached the War Department, today known as the Secretary of Defense, and said, I got a way we can, not only they enlist in the Army, they came to Washington and said, this is how we can get our nation ready for war. You teach our men how to box, because it's great for morale, it's great for discipline, there's a lot of hand coordination that goes to hand-to-hand combat, and keep in mind,
bayonet.
And bayoneting, because World War I is not about planes, it's not about tanks, it's not about bullets, it's about hand-to-hand trench warfare in France. And so boxing, and thereby its extension, bayoneting, which is really boxing with a blade, becomes regiment, and the Gibbons brothers lay down all the training for that get instituted for 4 million service members worldwide, nationwide, that is now credited as the reason, as crazy as it seems, the reason we win the war is largely credited to the boxing skills that go into training the men to fight in Europe. And that's probably will never happen in history again quite like that. But great story.
Yeah, unless it's killing zombies with video games, I don't see it either. Well, so they're building an intercontinental train. They hear immigrants from Ireland, boxing, World War I, and then what? I know that there's a whole series of books coming out with the whole thing. But where did they go after? Where do you go after that?
Well, part of that, and this story is one of 4 in the quadrilogy of Fight for Glory, which is the overall brand franchise of the story, actually starts in Ireland. So my great-grandparents came from Ireland in 1884, driven away to escape the persecution and prejudice that happened to the Irish in Ireland. They came to the United States in 1884, went to work for the railroad, the very railroad that built the one you just traveled from Spokane to Shelby on, and then they left Ireland to escape the persecution and the fighting, never having any idea that their first 2 born American sons would become the greatest brothers team in boxing history. So where does it go from there? The story, the trilogy, and this book, Shelby 1923, basically covers the arc of boxing in America, which is why it's called Fight for Glory, where America's love for boxing begins, over the span of 100 years. It starts in 1884, ends in 1983, the year Jack Dempsey dies. And it tracks across 4 books how boxing plays an integral part in this country, from the great fighters like Joe Louis, back to Jack Johnson and Joe Gans and Sam Langford, the great black fighters, all the way up to Muhammad Ali. So it's basically a great story, and the brothers lived through most of that period. Each book follows each brother, and then they're collectively in their later years. You mentioned one thing I'll add. After they retire from the ring, and by Shelby 1923, Mike, who's really the older brother, he's not central to this story, but he is in all the other ones. By the 3rd book, when they have retired, they are called to service their community and their country in law enforcement. My grandfather becomes sheriff of Ramsey County because the mob has become infested in the worst city in America at the time, St. Paul, Minnesota. And he's called out of the community because he's known for fighting Dempsey and is a hero across the land. He becomes a sheriff for 26 years, 6 consecutive 4-year terms, to help clean the mob out of the city, to clean the mob out of the sport, because boxing has become mob-infested from the 30s to the 60s. And so the brothers team with their cohorts, the FBI and a host of others, to help clean up America at the time, from 1934 to the early mid-60s. So it's a fascinating arc between the boxing, which indirectly carries through to these 2 brothers doing their good thing for community, family, and country.
Well, you have a photo there. I'd like to see that, because I want to talk about legacy. Just, I am my father's son, as are you. Yeah.
Well, this, and thanks for bringing this up. This is actually a picture of my father, 6 years old, in Shelby, Montana, who was ringside, watching the fight of his father fighting Dempsey, sitting next to the great Indian chief, Blackfeet chief, Chief Curly Bear. The Indian story, again, for this story, the backdrop is amazing. But this particular shot shows the tail fin of a small plane flown by Earl Vance a World War I pilot, who flew around the country, or certainly Montana and the upper northern tier of states, to try to raise money for the fight. So they would fly around from American Legion to American Legion raising money. And this little shot here is my father sitting at the back of the tail. This particular shot, within 2 weeks, this plane had crashed, and it's actually in the book. Aviation was a little rickety back in the time. So you talk about family and fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters. Family legacy became super important. I never expected to do any of this writing. You know, I had my own life. I was a filmmaker and director, producer, but not in these worlds. I thought it was my dad's story about his dad. And then one day it became obvious that, wait a minute, I'm the one that's supposed to tell the story. But it's a story of family legacy. How do we go back in time and help bring to life our ancestors and find out who they interacted with? Like, I would have never known that my family were best friends with Jack Johnson, notably at the time probably the most hated black man in America, or Joe Gans, all the great black fighters, or Italian or Jewish fighters. They were all brothers, and maybe not in the ring, but brothers everywhere else. And so to find their story and legacy about how the family came from Ireland and what happened to my father, and he was actually ringside for this fight, and where was my mother and what happened to her. These become, I think, important today in an age of genealogy and understanding our DNA. That's all nice, but it's not the story. I think it's the story we're really after. I mean, genealogy can give us a clue, but what are the stories? Who were our ancestors? Who were our fathers, our mothers, our grandfathers, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents? And I think that's what this story has given me an understanding, is explore who I am. How did I come to be? And I found that inspirational. I think most people will. It's a story that people relate to in terms of how it relates to their own life and what happened in their own family. That's my hope and faith for this story.
Yeah, there's always some aunt or whoever is writing out the genealogy and but that's what they miss. They miss the story. I'm related somehow to Paul Revere way back when, and we were on the first families of Virginia, which meant we were prisoners or something was wrong with us, or we wouldn't have had to leave England. So we all came from somewhere. But you know, when the last person who remembers us dies, we kind of die too.
We kind of die too, but stories live on.
So
you're right.
So what have you learned about yourself from all this? Because I mean, some of it, you know, everybody has Netflix dreams, and pursuing that is always interesting, and it has made some interesting connections for you, I think, in terms of dinners in Beverly Hills and the like. How do you think the world is going to approach this 30 boxes of Gibbons, and now it's being filtered through you?
Great question. I think probably the scary part for me was, what would I discover when I opened these boxes that I'd saved mysteriously for decades, but I never had a chance to open them because I was too busy running my own business. And I figured, well, these are my dad's boxes. One of these days I'll get to them. But then you start getting a little guilty and go, wait a minute, I'm getting at the back half of life, and I still haven't opened this stuff. What's inside? Well, part of the fear of going into that world was, what will I find out about my family? What will I find out about myself? What am I afraid to learn? Will I be surprised? And so diving in was a little bit, I would call it courageous, because you don't get to a story like this casually. History requires that you pay attention to it. You got to go touch the bottom of the deep end. You got to go to the bottom of the ocean to find out the detail, to be able to bring people back to life and do them service and respect them. But in that process, what do you find out about yourself? For me, I have learned a lot. It makes me rethink the way I approach life, how maybe I'm hopefully better about handling and listening and honoring people across all the spectrum. The people that I had no idea that I would have any relationship to, or I've crossed paths through this story because of my ancestors. They crossed paths with people I never dreamed would be in my path. And to learn about them, the Indians, the great black fighters, the Irish and Jewish fighters, all these people I didn't know, what was going on with the suffragette movement, everything that was happening in the 20s when America came of age after World War I. it made me pay attention to things much more so. I hope this is happening to me. I feel like it is, where I become much more sensitive to what's happening. And whether it's the European fighters or and their families, what's going down in South America, and Australia and New Zealand, it just helped open my world up. Not just American history, but world history, what was going on. And that's become important. I think that's the unifying element in this story, because we all care about our families. And this story is a way of like, how does someone approach a family history and look back? I've heard people say, man, this makes me wonder what happened to my grandfather or my grandmother or my great-grandparents. I never knew where I came from. And we've talked about this, you and I. Last year, in March, I traveled to my ancestral homeland of County Mayo, Ireland, and walked the land of my ancestors, which basically doesn't look a lot different than it did 150 years ago. And so that was a very significant moment of trying to figure out where my family came from, walking that farmland when they were too poor, and the queen owned all the fish and the sheep. They didn't own anything. And to walk that land helped bond me back to my heritage. I never thought about it that much before, but to tell the story, you have to go back and know yourself. So it's my hope that people will be inspired by a story that makes them see the value of family, see the value of their sisters and brothers across the land, that we all have a lot more in common than we think. And with that being said, we can build a better world.
Well, Dr. Gerard Gibbons, thank you for a very entertaining 28 minutes. Ventura, it's time for you to get on Amazon, Shelby 1923, and walk the land. Walk where your parents have been. So it's time for you to get moving.